The paintings at Lascaux are not near the entrance. They're not in a well-lit chamber where the whole group could gather to admire them. The most significant images, the horses, the aurochs, the strange human-animal figures, are deep inside. Past narrow passages that required crawling. Past chambers where a torch barely pushed back the dark. In places where, if the torch went out, you would be in total darkness, underground, with no way to orient yourself without touching the walls. Getting there was not easy. It was not comfortable. It required effort and a decision to go further than the safe, well-lit parts of the cave. So why did they do it there? Why not paint near the entrance, where the light was better, where it was easier to see what you were doing, where the work would be visible to everyone who passed? The answer that archaeology has been building toward for the last 2 decades is not the one most people expect. And once you hear it, the paintings look completely different. There's a detail about Paleolithic caves that most people don't register when they imagine prehistoric artists at work. Those artists were carrying open flame torches into enclosed spaces. Researchers at Tel Aviv University, led by Yafet Kadar and Ron Barkai, published a study simulating what happens when you burn a torch inside a narrow-mouthed cave chamber. Using software originally designed for modeling ventilation in underground parking structures, they calculated the effect on oxygen concentration. The result? Oxygen levels drop fast. In the confined inner chambers where many of the most significant paintings are located, a burning torch consumes oxygen quickly enough to create measurable hypoxia within minutes. And hypoxia, an oxygen deprivation at the level produced in a poorly ventilated chamber with a burning torch, has documented effects on the brain. It increases dopamine release. It produces visual disturbances. It can cause a specific kind of experience that subjects consistently describe as out of body, as boundary dissolution, as contact with something beyond ordinary perception. The people painting in those chambers were not just working by torchlight. They may have been painting while their brains were doing something that the torch itself was causing, which raises a different question entirely. What were they actually trying to do in there? Here's the pattern that makes this more than a hypothesis. Look at where the paintings are concentrated in decorated caves across France and Spain, Chauvet, Altamira, Lascaux, Fond de Gaume, and a consistent geography emerges. The most complex, most deliberate images are not near the entrances. They are in the deepest accessible chambers, the narrowest passages, the spaces furthest from the surface world and furthest from natural light. This is not random. Entrances would have been easier to work in, more visible to the group, more naturally lit. If the purpose of the paintings was communication, leaving a message for others to see, the entrance makes far more sense than a chamber that requires crawling through narrow rock to reach. But if the purpose was something that required isolation, enclosure, darkness, and a specific state of mind, the deep chamber makes sense in a way the entrance never could. So what was that purpose? The answer starts with what's actually depicted on those walls, because the content of Paleolithic cave art is more specific and more strange than the popular image of cave paintings of animals suggests. Yes, there are animals. Horses, bison, aurochs, mammoths, lions, rhinoceroses, rendered with a naturalism that still surprises viewers who see them in person. These animals were clearly observed carefully and painted with genuine skill, but scattered throughout the animal imagery, across sites spanning tens of thousands of years and thousands of miles, are figures that don't fit the same category. Therianthropes, part human, part animal. A figure at Lascaux with a bird's head on a human body, apparently in a trance. The sorcerer at Trois Frères, antlered, bearded, with owl eyes, in what appears to be a dancing posture. Figures from Chauvet that seem to dissolve from human into animal as the hand that drew them moved. These images appear consistently at the deepest points of the most significant caves, and they appear across cultures that had no contact with each other. Similar half-human, half-animal figures appear in caves in South Africa, in Australia, in Southern Africa, and in the European sites, separated by tens of thousands of years and thousands of miles. The cross-cultural consistency is a signal. When independent cultures separated by oceans and millennia produce the same specific type of image in the same type of location, repeatedly, you are probably looking at something that emerges from a shared human capacity rather than cultural diffusion. Researchers in the anthropology of religion, building on the work of Michael Winkelmann and David Lewis Williams, have argued that what these images record is the experience of trance, the specific visual and perceptual phenomena that occur when human consciousness is shifted through fasting, rhythmic sound, isolation, darkness, or oxygen deprivation. The phosphenies, geometric visual patterns generated by the visual cortex under sensory deprivation that appear consistently across Paleolithic cave art, are not artistic conventions. They are neurologically accurate depictions of what a human brain sees when it enters altered states. The caves were not galleries. They were laboratories. 30,000 years before anyone wrote a clinical research protocol, the Paleolithic was running consciousness experiments in underground chambers. The IRB would have had concerns. This interpretation, associated with the neuropsychological model of cave art first proposed by Lewis Williams and Dowson in the 1980s, has its critics, and the honest answer is that Paleolithic intention is genuinely unknowable with certainty. What the evidence does support is the location pattern, the Therianthrope consistency across cultures, the phosphine content, and now the hypoxia simulation. Each piece of evidence is consistent with the same interpretation. None of it proves it. What's undeniable is that the deep chambers of these caves were treated as different from the rest of the cave, set apart, deliberately used for specific purposes, accessible only to those willing to go further than ordinary light allowed. Whatever was happening in those chambers was not everyday activity. It was something the group considered worth the considerable effort of reaching it. And it was happening at night, or in conditions that were functionally identical to night, even during the day. Here's what the archaeological record shows about who was making these paintings, and when. Analysis of handprints found throughout Paleolithic caves, including a study published in the Journal of Archaeological Science, found evidence of hands belonging to adults of both sexes and children. This was not the work of a single specialist. Multiple individuals were involved in different ways over long periods of time. But the use of the deep chambers, the isolated spaces, the areas that required artificial light to reach at all, these show a different pattern. The lighting residues at the deepest points of decorated caves correspond to smaller groups, more deliberate access, more careful preparation. Two different modes of engagement with the same cave. Public space near the entrance. Private, controlled, deliberately isolated space in the depths. A distinction that maps perfectly onto what anthropologists find in virtually every human culture with shamanic practice, the separation between ordinary social space and the space reserved for non-ordinary states. Shamanism, in the anthropological sense, not the popular culture sense, is not a religious belief system. It is a cross-cultural complex of practices centered on the deliberate alteration of consciousness by specialists for the benefit of the group. Anthropologist Weston LaBarre identified shamanic practices on every inhabited continent. Michael Winkelmann's cross-cultural analysis of altered states practices found consistent patterns in societies with no contact with each other. Isolation, darkness, rhythmic sound, fasting, sensory reduction, all used to produce specific altered states that the culture then interpreted through its own framework. The deep cave fits this pattern with uncomfortable precision. Isolation from the group, achieved by going far from the entrance. Darkness beyond ordinary experience, the darkest natural environment accessible to a surface-dwelling animal. Sensory reduction, narrow passages that force contact with rock walls, reducing the boundary between body and environment. Oxygen reduction via torchlight, producing the neurological effects described by Kedar and Barkai's simulation. Rhythmic sound. Cave interiors have been documented to have unusual acoustic properties, chambers where sound resonates in ways that ordinary spaces don't, and there is evidence that these acoustic anomalies correlate with painted surfaces. Everything that produces altered states in documented shamanic practice was available simultaneously in a deep Paleolithic cave chamber by torchlight. What the artists were painting, in this interpretation, was not a record of what they had seen with ordinary eyes. It was a record of what consciousness produced when the conditions stripped away its ordinary constraints. The horse that flows into another horse at Chauvet, the bison that seems to have multiple heads, the human who is also an owl. These are not anatomical mistakes made by people who didn't know how to draw. The same hands produced naturalistic animals of remarkable precision. These are deliberate depictions of something that looked different from ordinary perception. The caves are the oldest documented evidence of humans deliberately engineering states of consciousness for collective purposes, using the landscape itself as the technology. Not a plant, not a brew, but rock, darkness, fire, and depth. And here is what makes this more than an archaeological curiosity. The neurological machinery being accessed in those chambers is the same machinery you use when you dream, when you meditate, when you experience awe, when you lose track of the boundary between yourself and something larger. The default mode network, the brain's self-referential processing system, quiets under the same conditions that those chambers created. What ancient humans were doing in those caves, neurologically, was temporarily suspending the ordinary self. What they were doing with that suspension, we can only infer. What the images suggest is that they were trying to contact something, not necessarily in the supernatural sense, but in the sense of accessing states of perception that ordinary consciousness doesn't reach, and bringing something back from those states that the group needed. Step back, and the cave paintings look completely different. They're not decorations. They're not hunting magic in any simple sense. They are the oldest physical record of humans doing something that every subsequent human culture has also done, in some form, deliberately entering a non-ordinary state of consciousness, and trying to capture or communicate what was found there. The medium was pigment on limestone. The technology was darkness, fire, and the oxygen-depleting effect of a torch in an enclosed space. The location was chosen because it was the furthest point from ordinary social life that was still accessible, a literal underworld within reach of the surface world. And the images they left, the Therianthropes, the flowing animals, the geometric phosphine patterns, are accurate depictions of what a human brain produces when its ordinary constraints are removed. Not imagination, not fantasy. A precise record of a specific neurological experience, preserved in rock for 35,000 years. They weren't painting what they saw. They were painting what they became when they went deep enough. Here's the one thing. The next time you're in genuine darkness, not the half-dark of a dimly lit room, but real darkness, where you can't see your hand in front of your face, notice what your visual cortex does. It doesn't go quiet. It starts producing faint geometric patterns, a sense of movement in the dark, the feeling that something is at the edge of perception. These are phosphines, the brain's own visual output when deprived of external input. The same patterns that appear over and over in Paleolithic cave art. You don't have to crawl into a cave to access what those ancient artists were accessing. Your brain is running the same hardware they had. The dark is still the dark. The visual cortex still produces phosphines. The default mode network still quiets when the conditions are right. What they went underground to find, you carry with you. You just rarely give it the conditions to emerge. And if the idea that ancient humans were deliberately engineering states of consciousness using darkness, fire, and oxygen deprivation, and that the technology for this was the cave itself, connects to something you've heard before, it should. Because the other technology they used for the same purpose didn't require going underground at all. Why ancient humans had a drug that made them run faster and think differently, that one's next.